simple, fast steps. Step number one, let's go over the probabilities of the unemployment rate getting to 30% in the United States. And when I'm talking about the unemployment rate, I'm referring to the U6 number, not the headline U3 number. You guys know from watching my videos, the U3 number is totally bogus. And the U6 number, although it's not perfect, is a much better representation of how many people are actually unemployed in the economy. Let's start with a chart going all the way back to 1930 to 1942. This is the unemployment rate during the Great Depression. It goes from 0% to 25%, pretty much flat lines until we get to the end of 1930. Then it goes parabolic over 25% after 1932. It gradually comes back down before we get to 1938. It spikes up again, comes down, then we have World War II. But the main thing I want you to take away from this chart is that once unemployment spiked at the end of 1930, it continued to go up. Sometimes it would flatline, come down slightly, but then continue up until we got to the end of 1932. From the bottom all the way to its peak, it took at least 2 years. Also, when the unemployment rate spiked in 1938, that took over a year to get all the way to its peak. Let's go look at a chart of U6 more currently, going back to 1996 all the way to 2020. This chart is straight from shadowstats.com. On the left, we go from 0% up to 40%. It goes down until we get to the dot-com bust, comes back up and goes down again until we get to the GFC. We know what happened then, spikes up, comes down to where we're at an all-time low prior to the cerveza sickness. But I want you to notice that once the unemployment rate spiked, it continued to go up for at least 2 years. That brings us to where we are today. Of course, we had this huge spike. It's come back down, and this is the official BLS statistics. But we were at 23% before it's come down slightly. These numbers are very suspect in and of themselves. More on that in just a moment. But you can see at 23%, we're already very close to 30%. But this cycle has only gone 4 months, where typically they'll go 2 years and at a very minimum 1 year. That would imply we've got at least another 8 months to go. And I think it could last a lot longer, especially when you consider what's going on in the United States right now with a second wave coming through. A lot of states, it's the first wave. And whether you think the cerveza sickness is a hoax or if it's real, it really doesn't matter. From an economic standpoint or from an investment standpoint, you have to look at how it affects human behavior. And in states like Florida and Texas, I know for a fact, because I have a lot of family in Texas, that it is definitely affecting human behavior there. That means less people going out, less people spending money, and fewer jobs. But also, when you look at the history of pandemics, you see that typically these things come in 3 waves. And adding fuel to the fire, we've got to look at how the U.S. economy is structured. I've got to give all the credit to my partner in Rebel Capitalist Pro, Lynn Alden, right here. She brought this up in a recent conversation I had with her. But if you think about the U.S. economy, it's heavily skewed toward the service sector, meaning most of the employment is in service sector jobs. So compare that to a Japan or a Germany, where a lot of their economy is based around manufacturing. It's a lot easier for them to go into work during a pandemic than it would be for someone driving an Uber, working at a Starbucks, or working at a local restaurant. So what's happening is when the cerveza sickness goes through a country, it's disproportionately affecting the United States to a much greater degree. Also, when we think about the output of the total economy, people say, well, we're going to get this V-shaped recovery or a W-shaped recovery or a U-shaped, whatever letter you want to attach to it. But they'll say, well, at least get up to maybe 75% of where we were before. But they really don't think through the knock-on effects of the economy only getting back up to 75%, 80%, or even 90%, and how that would affect unemployment moving forward. To dive into this further, let's go to a recent interview I had with Jim Bianco.
Let's say that we reopen the economy globally and we get back to 90% of where we were. Most Wall Street goes, great, we're back to 90%. Except let's put that into perspective. In the Great Recession in 2008, at its worst point, we were still producing 96% of the output that we produced at the high. So you only lost 4%. And that was enough to have the stock market and put a 10% unemployment rate up, create the Tea Party movement, Occupy Wall Street. The Great Depression in the 1930s, at its worst point in 1933, the output was still 75 or 74% of what it was in 1929. And that produced a Great Recession. So what I'm trying to say is, if you tell me that the economy is on its way back to 85 or 90% of what it was before the pandemic, I'm telling you we're running a Great Depression.
So even if we get back up to 75% output compared to where we were prior to the cerveza sickness, that still takes us right back to the Great Depression. And again, I'd remind you that during that time frame, it took us at least 2 years to get to peak unemployment levels. And this would make a lot of sense. Just anecdotally, like I said, I've got a lot of family in Texas. 2 of my nieces there, Mac and Lexi, are professionals. One is a nurse, one's an engineer. And a lot of their friends that are white-collar young professionals are losing their jobs. The whole divisions of companies are laying off their workers. And that's in Texas. So if it's that bad in Texas, just think about how bad it is in the United States. Moving over to California, my sister lives in Paso Robles, just a little small tourist town in wine country. But a lot of her friends own these little bars and wine tasting facilities in town, and almost every one of them has had to shut down because with the regulations, with the cerveza sickness, that they can only have a 50% occupancy, as an example, or the tables have to be a certain distance apart. Even if they open back up, they cannot make a profit, so they're just shutting down for good and firing all their workers. I think the main takeaway here from these anecdotal stories I'm giving you is the first wave of unemployment with the cerveza sickness was most likely these service sector jobs. But now I think we're going to see a lot of white-collar jobs if they cannot work from home. And that's for the first wave of unemployment. If history is a guide, we've still got at least another 20 months to go. So we're 4 months into it, and this is what the chart looks like. A future chart could look something very similar to this, a lot like it did back between 1930 and 1932. But another thing I want to point out is the discrepancy with the BLS numbers and the unemployment claims. To dive into that, let's go straight to the internet. And this is from wolfstreet.com. Very cool website if you guys haven't checked it out. This is a blog post from July 2nd. The total number of people who continued to receive unemployment compensation in the week ending June 27th under all state and federal unemployment insurance programs, including gig workers, surged by 937,000 people in 1 week to 31 million, the highest and worst and most gut-wrenching ever. Yeah, that's one way to put it for sure. And you can see what he's talking about in this chart. Incredibly, given the record number of unemployment insurance recipients, the BLS, or maybe BS we should start calling them now, dared to claim that the number of unemployed fell by 3.2 million in June to 17.8 million. Given that a record 31.5 million people were actually receiving state and federal unemployment in the latest week, and that this record number of people were actually unemployed as per the Labor Department, the BLS is now underreporting unemployment by at least 13.7 million people. So if the BLS is wildly understating unemployment, when you compare that to the amount of people that are actually receiving unemployment benefits, and you consider the fact that just 2 months ago, we were at 23%, and that's what the government was willing to admit to. It's not a stretch to think we could already be at 30% unemployment. And keep in mind, if history is any indicator, we've got another 20 months to go, and that's assuming we can get back up to 75% economic output, which would just get us back to where we were during the Great Depression. Step number 2, the probability of the Dow going to 30,000 and beyond. We have to start by understanding the stock market is not a reflection of the economy at all. The stock market can continue to go up and up and up while the economy is going directly into the toilet. I would go so far to say there's an inverse relationship between the two of them going back to 2008 and the GFC. The worse the economy gets, the more liquidity that's created and diverted away from the real economy into financial assets like the stock market. Just to reiterate, to make sure we're all on the same page, the economy could be horrible. It could be an autonomous zone. It could be Chaz. But as long as there's enough liquidity going into the stock market and being created by either the government or the Fed, the stock market can continue to hit all-time highs. Very counterintuitive, especially if you're new to this channel. But the best takeaway is to completely forget that there's any tie between the stock market and the real economy. And going back to March, I have a hypothesis. The Fed put has been replaced by a government stimulus put. So we've got a chart here going all the way back prior to March to today's date. And on the left, we go from 2,000 up to 3,500. This is a chart of the S&P 500. And we can see that it really was doing well, all-time high, then it falls off a cliff going into the cerveza sickness. While it was going down in March, if you recall, the Fed was throwing everything at it, including the kitchen sink. They were going for $1 trillion a day commitment in the repo market. QE infinity, dropping interest rates down to 0%. And every time they did something extreme, the market would go up for maybe 3 or 4 hours and then bam, fall right out of bed again. The market didn't start to go back up until the government came in and announced a fiscal stimulus package. That's why I'm thinking that the Fed put could now have been replaced by a government put. So going back to the chart, we see it goes up from its lows in March once the stimulus package was announced by the government. And it's continued to go up since then as the stimulus checks have been delivered. You could definitely see how the market could have gone up because of this stimulus sugar rush from all of these people taking their additional unemployment checks or their checks they wouldn't have otherwise received, opening up a Robinhood account and buying the dip. We've all seen the headlines from CNBC that the week after people started to receive their stimulus checks, trading activity went up by 90%. And it makes sense when you're on Twitter and you see people like Dave Portnoy saying that all you have to do is blindfold yourself and pick out any 3 letters to create a ticker symbol. Buy that and you're going to get rich because stocks always go up. It's a sign of the times if I have ever seen one. And let's not forget, we're going into an election where every single administration, including the Trump administration, tries to juice the economy and the stock market to buy votes. So if the first round of stimulus, the CARES Act, brought the market from the lows in March all the way up to almost all-time highs in the S&P 500, what's this next round of stimulus going to do to the stock market? If we were at 3 trillion here, where are we going to be here? Is it going to be 9 trillion, 10 trillion? Who knows? It's going to be a ludicrous level of stimulus. You combine that with the TGA, the Treasury General Account. This is the bazooka the administration has at their disposal to spend into the economy anytime they want. It's like this massive shot of quantitative easing. So you combine these two, and it's very easy to see how the market could go parabolic, regardless of what's going on with the economy. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying the stock market is definitely going up. There are no certainties, there are only probabilities. In fact, I'm a stock market bear, but I want to present both arguments, some interesting facts that will get you thinking so you can be better educated and make good decisions for your financial future. We all understand the argument for quantitative easing and the Fed printing limitless amounts of money to support the stock market and have it continually go up. But I think most people are missing this stimulus sugar rush that could have more power in the mind of the market than what the Fed has done in the past or will do in the future. But to unpack this even further, to make sure you understand I'm not the only one wearing a tinfoil hat when it comes to the Dow 30,000 and unemployment rate at 30%. Let's go right to my most recent interview with Luke Gromen.
There is simply no ability to let equities fall off, sell off too far before it begins to threaten really U.S. national security. And when I say that, basically threaten the ability for the U.S. to place Treasury bonds at a politically expedient price. And so, yeah, I think that's exactly what you could see. If things get worse again, you're just going to see the Fed sort of, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you could see that them get more aggressive with Main Street lending. There's a lot of ways they can get the money into the economy, particularly if they're married to the Fed. And I think that the mythical separation of church and state between the Fed and Treasury that existed in parts of time over the last several decades, I think that all but got removed in March and in April with some of the things that were done. And so I think that's really how you get to that type of scenario, which really is. It would be a Venezuelization of markets in the U.S. economy, where unemployment could be absolutely 30%. Stocks could be at 30,000 and people are sitting at home collecting $2,000 a month for doing nothing.
So the big question you're probably asking yourself right now is, George, okay, I get everything that you're saying, but how massive is this stimulus 2.0 going to be? I realize it's going to be ludicrous levels, but that doesn't exactly pinpoint it too specifically. You're not really quantifying it very well there, George. So to put some numbers, some math behind it to give you an idea of how ginormous this thing could potentially be, let's go right back to the internet. We've got an article from Forbes outlining the differences between the CARES Act, which we had, and the potential HEROES Act we'll have in the future before the election. And it's just unbelievable how these things are named, isn't it? It just goes back to what Ron Paul always said. And you look at what the name of a government program is, and the actual effect will be the complete opposite when it's put into practice. But I digress. Going back to this article, unlike the CARES Act, the HEROES Act provides a stimulus check for all dependents regardless of age. So we start there, but of course it gets a whole heck of a lot better when we get into some of the other proposals, such as the Emergency Money for the People Act that would provide $2,000 a month for up to 1 year. The Automatic Boost to Communities Act, would provide monthly stimulus checks for $2,000 for at least 12 months with an additional $1,000 monthly payment for the following 12 months. The Monthly Economic Crisis Support Act would provide a $2,000 monthly stimulus check for individuals and up to 3 dependents for at least 6 months. So basically open-ended. Other acts include the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. That sounds like free market capitalism, doesn't it? Would cancel rent and mortgage payments for an individual's primary residence for up to 1 year. Limit of 1 per household. How could you have more than 1 per household? You're talking about the place where you actually live. Honestly, you just cannot make this stuff up, can you? Moving on. The Getting America Back to Work Act. Would provide a payroll tax rebate that covers 80% of payroll taxes. At least there we're addressing taxes. That's at least a step in the right direction. The American Tax Rebate and Incentive Program, or TRIP, the Fed would love that acronym, I'm sure, would offer $4,000 tax credit per adult plus a $500 per qualifying child to take a vacation at least 50 miles away from your house. You've got to be kidding me. This is truly taking central planning to a whole new level. So the takeaway from step number 2 is if the government and the Fed take away the punch bowl, meaning no more drugs, and they actually allow price discovery, imagine that. The market falls out of bed. If they keep the stimulus the same, call it $3 trillion, market stays flat. This is assuming this cerveza sickness stays the same as it is right now. It doesn't get worse, and it's a big unknown. But if they double this $3 trillion, let's say take it to $6 trillion, and you heard what I just read off the computer, it could go to 10 trillion, 15 trillion, who knows? Then I could see the stock market going to all-time highs. And if they combine that with the TGA, we could see the market go into this tulip craze type of hyper bubble. Step number 3 is the United States turning Venezuelan. Luke Groman touched on this briefly in the clip, but it's vitally important you discover how this could work so you can put the pieces of the puzzle together and not only survive, but thrive in the future. One thing is for sure, this does not end well. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to reveal how this all plays out in the next video. The editors have told me this has gone on way too long, so make sure you tune in next time. The rest of this step number 3 is going to completely blow your mind. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.